Okay. So hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I was saying this is the very first in-person event, academic event that I've been to for like a year and a half, and I am delighted and honored that this is the first one. So I'm Lynn Joy-Rich. I'm a professor here in the Department of Modern Culture and Media, where I work on issues of media and culture and gender and sexuality. I'm also the organizer of the new LGBTQIA plus thinking initiative from the Pembroke Center, and that we are very delighted to have been invited on to co-sponsor this event. But of course, the primary sponsors and organizers of this event, who we need to thank so much, are the Brown Arts Institute, which does amazing things, as you probably all know. And so I'm very happy to be here, and I'm very happy to introduce you to two artists in residence from the Brown Art Institute, who together originated and produced the beautiful, stimulating magazine, Headmaster, about which you'll be hearing much more, and there's also issues there for people to look at. So, but I'm delighted to introduce Jason Tranchida and Matthew Lawrence. So Jason Tranchida is, his creative practice is an interdisciplinary intersection of curatorial, design, and artistic pursuits. His project-based art practice includes objects, installations, video, and digital projections. His design practice operates as, Llama product? Is that how we say?
Yeah.
Okay, Llama product. And it centers around events, environmental graphics, branding, and graphic design. And that's a 2016 recipient of a Design Rhode Island Catalyst Grant. As co-editor and creative director of Headmaster magazine, his work has received 2 Print Merit Awards from the Society of Publication Designers. And then Matthew Lawrence is an artist, writer, editor, and public events programmer. He previously edited Law and Order Party, which I think is not at all what you might think, that it's a curated email-based guide to art events happening in Rhode Island. He's the 2015 recipient of a Public Humanities Scholar Award from the Rhode Island Council for the Humanities that honors the independently produced literary events that he put on between 2006 and 2015. In 2019, his hybrid video fiction essay was part of the Webby-nominated digital catalog, Raid the Icebox Now with Nicole Eisman. And that accompanied her exhibit at the RISD Museum. His writing has also appeared in a number of regional art publications, as well as The New Inquiry, The Guardian, and Salon. So please join me in welcoming Jason Mack. So I want to start by asking you a very kind of broad question, which is, can you start off by telling us about your work, but also specifically your link to the BAI and the way that the BAI itself is linked to your work?
Yeah, do you want to talk or should I talk?
I'll start and you can jump in, I
Okay.
guess. Yeah, we're interchangeable, so we'll just finish sentences and cut each other off and stuff. But anyway, we applied for a BAI community outreach grant last year in the pandemic, the spring of
the pandemic spring.
the
yeah.
pandemic
The first pandemic spring.
And they graciously then extended them for another year. So, and we applied with a project that was a pre-pandemic project, a research project that was supposed to be about a 6-month to a year research and sort of installation project that centered around a really crazy story around the Newport Navy sex scandal of 1919. The name of our project is Scandalous Conduct, Newport 1919. So as the pandemic plugged along, so did our research, and it kept growing and growing to this 6-month project is now sort of a 6-year project. So the sort of theme of the BAI at the time that they were administering these grants was all about remaking the real.
Right.
So you know, our project is a sort of historical project that will sort of have an artistic output. It'll be sort of an interpretation of it. So it's our, you know, sort of rethinking the real. So we're using a lot of archival documents and things like that that are sort of the crux of the project.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we were one of 10 people that got the grant, all Rhode Island artists, maybe all Providence artists, I'm not, at least all Rhode Island artists, and I think for the second year the pool's been expanded from 10 to 15 or 16.
Yeah, something like that.
So one of the things that the BAI stresses that I think is so innovative about it is thinking about really the intersection between creative practice and critical thinking, and the way that creative practice and art itself can operate as a mode of scholarship and research, and then vice versa also, the way that scholarly pursuits are also driven by creative impulses. And it seems to me that your work in the scandalous conduct Newport 1919, which again is about, you guys can say more, but about the way that there was actually entrapment used to try to lure sailors and just men in Newport into sexual relations so that they could then, you know, they could then jail them, right?
Yeah.
So it seems like your work, again, was the perfect sort of model of that BAI idea of scholarly work as creative and creative work as involving scholars. So I wonder if you have any thoughts about the way you brought those together, why that's particularly important, whatever your thoughts about that might be.
Yeah, so the project, and this is the shortest possible version of the story, which is hard for me, is that just after World War I, there was this Navy-sanctioned entrapment scandal, which you've already described a little bit, but sailors were being sent out to trap other sailors and then other men of Newport in gay sex acts that they would then get arrested for. And it happened in 2 phases in the spring and summer of 1919. Because of the scandal that ensued, what came out of this that interests us is this paper trail that includes the original write-ups that the sailors produced.
It was essentially their daily reports. So
Their daily reports of who they trapped, who and what kind of sex they had that night, and then it's all written in the tone of a 19-year-old boy, because that's who was writing most of them. So that's part of it. And then as the pandemic wore on and we had all this extra time to go deeper into the research, we got interested in other ways that the Navy was using marketing at the time, which include this production that they were touring around of a sort of vaudeville musical Jack and the Beanstalk that included dozens of men in drag. So it's getting bigger and weirder, and because of the pandemic, we've been just going further and further and further with it, because we thought we would do something in the summer of 2020, decided to wait a little while, and then we got a grant, and then we got another grant, and so now we've got like...
And then we found the original score of this crazy vaudeville opera, so now we sort of have more of these artifacts that are our next phase is to just sort of figure out what to do with them.
But what's been nice about Brown is that we're not composers, we're not playwrights, we're not photographers, we're not painters. So we don't know what the end product of this is even going to be, really. And we were thinking sort of a little installation, sort of historical informative thing a year and a half ago, and now we're like, well, why don't we just do an opera? And so Brown has been extremely generous in letting us just, run with whatever we want, and
really kind of fostering the project. And we did a first step of we did audio recordings of younger men reading these daily reports, and we sort of presented it at a virtual festival the BAI put on about a year and a half ago. So that was actually the first sort of step of what we're going to do with this stuff. So it's been great to be here and have them sort of just foster it and encourage us to take it to the next step and go from there. So then this talk sort of was also we also do this magazine thing.
Yeah.
And,
So let's talk about the magazine
Yeah.
thing, which is not also, again, a beautiful magazine, right? That if people want to look at other copies, they're
Yeah, feel
they're
free to
there. So
grab them
yeah,
and
feel
pass
free to
them
grab
around
and
if you
pass
want.
them if you want to look at them. So obviously you'll say more, but the magazine basically features original projects by a variety of artists working in a variety of mediums, all of which, the work in the magazine, all of which is based on assignments that you write for each artist. So can you tell us about your idea behind that magazine of sort of writing assignments and having artists produce it? Tell us about that structure and that sort of concept behind it.
Sure, yeah. I'll start. But yeah, that was sort of a great intro to the magazine and and how it all works. But so about 10 years ago, Matthew and I and actually 2 other people got together and we were like, we want to make a magazine. And we didn't know exactly what we wanted it to be. It was more sort of an artistic pursuit, and we got together every Monday night and had show and tell with magazines and books that we liked, and sort of just started to develop the concept. And we were like, oh, okay, I guess this magazine needs content. How do we get that? And we started actually giving each other sort of assignments to do little projects just to get things going, and as for the possible pieces that would be part of the first issue. And so then where we landed, we're like, this is a really interesting concept. What if we give assignments to artists to do original projects for each issue? So the way it works is we would approach an artist, and if they're interested in working with us, we'll say, hey, we'll give us a week to 3 months, and we'll write you an assignment. And then you do a project, and then our job is to sort of publish the results of your assignment. So each issue has about 9 to 10 projects in it. And each assignment's written specifically for that person. So we do a lot of work just researching their work and sort of
and really kind of digging through their work and saying what about this is exciting to us? Is it, sometimes it's conceptual, sometimes it's just purely visual, sometimes it's an angle that they're coming from.
Yeah, and so this is what not many people see these, but this is actually what each artist receives. So it's their name, they get a due date, which most of them miss, and then they get an assignment. And then, so there's a lot of research that Matthew and I do into what the assignment is. So we don't, we kind of suss some things out to be is this a good assignment? Is this a good topic? Could we do something with that if that was given it to us? And so a lot of times at the bottom we have suggested reading. So that's reading that we've done as part of our research, and that we sort of it also just a little snippet to give them a little bit of, this is where we're coming from. They're also free to ignore it. And then, yeah, we give them 6 to 8 weeks, depending on what medium they work for or how much we're asking for.
Painters and sculptors get a little bit longer.
Yeah. And we did the shortest deadline we ever gave was 24 hours, where literally we needed one more project. It needed to be a photo project, and this crazy photographer, crazy to work with us, did a photo shoot in each of New York boroughs, but like lined them up, and he photographed around the clock for 24 hours.
Wow.
And so then the assignments essentially become the table of contents of the issue. And so, again, due date, the artist's name, what their assignment was, any reference material, and then this is actually the order that they appear in the magazine. And so these are covers from issue 1 through 7. This is issue number 8, which came out about 3 years ago. It's the Village People issue, so it was all centered around, it wasn't about the village people per se, but it was about the archetypes of each of the personas of the village people. And then these are some samples of the inside, but you also have hard copies to look at. And then this is our latest issue that came out this summer, and it's a collaboration issue. And if you want to talk about that a little bit, or if you have more.
I did want to actually ask you guys about collaboration, but
Sure.
but let me hold off on that for a second, because I wanted to first pick up on something that you said when you were giving the example of the village people, and you said it's not it's not directly about the village people, right? Which again was something I find really interesting across the magazine, that the assignments are, in a way, they make us question what it means to be about something, right? Because the assignments are in some ways in kind of a bleak relationship to the topic, right? So again, it's not like your assignments for the village people one was like make an art project about the village people. You would find different ways into it, very different ways that then raise lots of different issues around mobility, policing in America. I mean, sort of using things that touched on it, but to open it up in lots of different ways that I think kind of shows the multiple routes in and out of thinking about what it even means to engage with something, because you're changing the something even in the process. So I'm just wondering if you have thoughts about, both on the nitty-gritty level, like how do you think of the assignments, but even, your idea behind making the assignments be this sort of multiple, really kind of coming at the topics in an unexpected way.
Yeah, so the village people issue we can talk about for a minute, because that one, it was a pretty complicated one, because there are 6 characters, and we wanted to have a project representing each of the 6 characters. And we produce a somewhat sexy magazine. And this was 2017, so, at any time, but especially 2017, we don't want to have a sexy cop project. There's, construction and leather and the indigenous guy. There's just sort of a lot of potential ways that it could have gone wrong, I think.
Yeah.
But also we needed to match 6 artists to these 6 archetypes. It turns out one of them, the leather guy, we actually went through 4 artists who flaked before we got the final project. We're still not sure why. But there would have been a gap in the concept if we didn't have a leather project at the end. On top of that, the village people, while they're an easy entry point, like they had a couple of hits in the 70s, but people know who they are instantly. and queer people and straight people and children, like everybody knows YMCA and Macho Man but excuse me. But there's I guess I'll keep going.
Yeah, sure.
An additional complication is that the actual Village People, the original guy who started the group is the cop character who wrote a lot of the songs and is also extremely litigious and has sued lots of people for using their name and imagery without seeking rights. What we did is, legally it's fine, but we also knew that it was possibly going to be an issue. And on top of that, the other 5 original members of the Village People got fired in 2016 or 17.
I think 16.
And he replaced them all with younger people. So there was this whole strange thing that we did not anticipate at all. In 2017, which was also, some of the projects predated the Trump election, and some of them came after, and everybody, it was sort of like 2020 in the same way, where there was this like sort of
Kind of
crazy event that happened that had a before and an after.
Yeah, and there were a couple projects actually, at the one about different locations that they were they were asking. You know, she was a pre-Trump project, and then she was like, "Oh, I might have done a couple things different. Can I change it?" And we're like, "No," and she was ultimately okay with that, but. Yeah, so it was, it was an interesting ride, and just, also just to sort of build on a little bit what Matthew was saying, it was just this funny, like, we have this really accessible, like, sort of from a marketing standpoint, like, a way to promote this magazine that's obscure and a very short, arty run, but we couldn't use imagery from the Village People. We couldn't use music from the Village People. Like, we consulted a couple lawyers at one time just to make sure we were, I don't know what they would sue us for, but anyway, it was, it was an interesting, it was an interesting ride.
Well, actually, it seems in some ways that sort of structuring limitations that actually was inspiring, because again, it means that you came at the issue, again, in these variety of ways that aren't necessarily so direct, but that opens up ways that one might think about it, which is really interesting.
Yeah.
I'm going to get to the other issue about collaboration, but before that, and just thinking about the Village People, like as you talked about, this queer icon group that has also, in some ways, entered the mainstream, was always on that. Right. So one thing I also want to ask you about is that perhaps a combination of serious and tongue-in-cheek. The magazine is called A Magazine for Man Lovers. So I wanted to ask you about that, about how you see this magazine as a sort of, or do you, a specific inscription of a kind of gay male subjectivity, queer more broadly, kind of making fun of those identities, claiming those identities. How do you see that?
Yeah, I guess I'll start, but
Sure.
it's all those things, and it's definitely all those things, and it's sort of, tongue in cheek is very important to us, and it's this sort of, it's called Headmaster, and we market it as such in a sort of headmastery school way. But we are giving assignments to artists, so it's, everything's a sort of play on it. It's like very, very serious approaches to, things that we, I guess the best way to describe it is, especially in terms of like assignments, I mean, we write them very seriously, but they're also, there is a sort of fun and playful aspect to a lot of them. And I think that's, for a lot of artists, it's a really easy, it's a fun way into the project. And, you know, we were kind of talking about this the other day of just like sort of like, you know, how an artist starts this project. Actually, one of the artists just walked in from this issue. But yeah, I mean, and it's, in terms of like our tagline, you know, the art magazine for man lovers, also it sort of plays on the history of sort of queer or gay male publications, you know, from sort of physique journals up to the, you know, the magazines of the 70s and early 2000s, and sort of plays with that, but also it's just like, well, what's a man lover? Anyone can love a man. Like it's you know, it's this sort of thing that means something and means nothing at the same time.
Yeah. And certainly you have included a wide array of artists, right?
Oh, sure,
Including,
yeah, male,
you know,
you know,
and a wide array of
all
topics,
identifying,
including
yeah.
lesbian ones and queer more
Absolutely.
broadly, and lots of different permutations.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
Yeah, and I think originally the Man Lovers thing came out because when we decided we wanted to have a magazine, we were for gay men brainstorming, and then this was 2010, so crowdfunding was a brand new concept, and I had heard about Kickstarter, which was brand new, and so it ended up being the first successful Kickstarter in Rhode Island. And so we said, okay, well, the people that are giving us money to make it are our audience. And mostly it was our friends and friends of friends, but it was pretty much split down the middle, gay men and straight women. So we said, okay, well, let's go with man lovers. And really, it wasn't any more serious than that at first. So.
Yeah.
what do you think the particular importance is of doing a queer magazine at this point? And I guess that's two questions in one. What's the importance of doing a queer magazine at this point, and what's the importance of doing a queer magazine at this point? Like, what's the, you know, both kind of thinking about queer production, but also thinking about print productions still in this era, or maybe especially in this era. So what are your thoughts about the importance of a queer magazine?
Yeah, do you want me to start, or do you want to?
Yeah, why don't you do the queer, and I'll do the Why magazine.
I was going to answer the other one. Well, why don't you start then?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I mean, when we started I get this sort of anecdote is like best describes it. When we told people 10, 11 years ago that we were starting a magazine, everybody was like, oh, it's an online magazine. And we're just like, no, it's a print magazine. And people were like, huh? They're like, print is dead. And so, 10 years later, we tell people we're doing a magazine, and they're just like, oh, it's a print magazine, right? So there's been this shift in publishing that's been really, really interesting, where like 10 years ago, everybody was doing digital, and then the magazine industry, as we knew it before, sort of crumbled. Daily or weeklies and monthlies just, all went online and went down to nothing. But then all these sort of self-published things and very hyper-specific magazines started to approach, and now there's this huge amount of like really beautifully done, very specific, magazines. I mean, there's a queer cooking magazine that, it's
Two, I think
there's two.
two.
Yeah. So there became this sort of market for expressing, different things through these, very specific magazines. So that's sort of the arc of like what we've been working on, which has been really interesting. But for us as sort of, well, for me as a designer, I'm just like, yes, I want to design a print magazine. Like that's, a sort of dream. And then curatorially, it's just, it freezes the work in sort of a concrete object, right? So it's not work that's online that might be there, might disappear later. And we get to sort of decide whose projects rub up against each other and whose work gets to be in the same issue together. And, we work really hard to have a range of ages of artists and locations and media and things like that. So we'll put a really well-established artist next to someone who's maybe still in undergrad. And it's pretty special to be able to do that, where if it wasn't in print or sort of a gallery show, that could just dissolve very easily.
Yeah, and just, I want you to get to the queer part in a minute, but just as a quick kind of comment, it's a print magazine, obviously, but it is interesting how the artists, I mean, they are multimedia.
Yeah.
Right, and that, you have multiple kind of media within the print, and then you also have some things that take us beyond the magazine to the website to see videos or to hear music, or so that, there's an interesting way in which it expands even across those boundaries.
Right, yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Did you want to
Yeah.
go to the question of why is it important to have a queer magazine at this point?
Sure. Yeah, I think, so there's this legacy of queer, and specifically gay male, media that dates back to, let's say, the 1940s. It probably goes back further than that, but the sort of physique magazines of the 1950s, that then turned into the more hardcore things in the 70s and 80s. The 90s was sort of a explosion of different titles of commercial publications that were all like cheaper and cheaper and lower quality and lower quality. And then in the 2000s, there was this sort of boom of arty queer publications, and still mostly gay male, although you brought up today Girls Like Us, which was a great one out of the Netherlands, and a couple of others. And what we were talking about today is that things that are online, especially, and especially queer things that are online, are always in danger. This has happened since the mid-2000s, where these communities will form online, or commercial enterprises will form online, and then the community will be taken away because of either the credit card processing company or the hosting company, or somebody will be offended and then it's just gone. I personally was writing for, I spent and at the beginning of Headmaster, I was writing for gay outlets online, and even like alternative weeklies and things, and just none of them are online anymore. None of the records are online. Some of them you might find a web page, but all of the links are broken and the images are broken, and
Same with Tumblr and
Tumblr was a good example.
and to now in the policing that's going on in Instagram and things like that too.
Yeah.
So I feel like, yeah, the queer voices, especially things that might be considered explicit or whatever, are always being policed or torn down. So, to do a magazine for us is a very important thing, to have this object that, people then own, or it's in archives and in libraries and things like that. So
Yeah.
It's really important for us to have this sort of snapshot of sort of queer art and culture at a certain time.
Yeah, Yeah.
And we're a pretty specific like art project. We're not, if somebody says, what did 2011 look like, you know, people want to hear about whatever happened in 2011. Like, Occupy Wall Street, let's say. That, I think that was around then, or the Tea Party, or whatever. And if you go to Headmaster number 3, you're probably not gonna get that.
It's our snapshot.
Yeah,
Right.
but it's still there, and it's dated in the sense that it has a date on it, not that it's dated badly.
Right.
We hope.
So you mentioned, we didn't talk about this before, but you've mentioned sort of various things sort of about the market that, you know, even, again, both serious and joking about who your audience was. So I'm curious about that because I think that, I'm curious how you negotiate that, right? As somebody who, like me, studies media culture, right? There's a way in which sort of the politics of visibility is like a double-edged sword, and that we're in a world now where like marketing, you know, things are visible, but they're visible as consumer commodity objects, and you know, people are ever more precisely defined into demographic categories to market to. So even like your example of like, oh, there's 2 gay cooking magazines out now. So there's a way in which, you know, sort of being recognized as a group in culture to, you know, to be spoken to has its productive value. And on the other hand, we could say it's already totally delimited within the terms of consumer commodity culture. So how do you negotiate that? Because obviously you're doing something that is, you know, not dominant culture, but yet you have to still think about your audience. You are kind of in some ways framing it in terms of both the history of sort of marketing towards certain, even the way in which like male physique magazines, for instance, that I know you're interested in, you know, were marketed to a particular demographic, but couldn't sort of acknowledge that that's what they were.
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
So that
Yeah.
they were, but there is this, again, both kind of acknowledgement of one needs to think of these market relations, but how do you avoid being just trapped within them? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're in a pretty specific place in the market. I mean, we're not, you know, our distribution is not massive, so we're not as responsible to advertisers as a publication that even was slightly larger would be. At the same time, we're putting out a thing that now costs, I don't know, $9,000 or something to print each issue. And we do need to make that money back somehow. Do you want to talk about stores? Because we were talking about that today.
Yeah, well, you know, and I guess the short answer is we're not beholden to that, even though like we're constantly thinking about it because we do have to sell them. But and we also sort of negotiate a couple lines of like where we might fit in a bookstore per se, or in a magazine store. So some places get it and they will put it in the gay section. Other places will get it and they'll put it in the porn section. And then we're just like, no, put it in the art section.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting because it's okay in all those places, and in the sort of history of all the stockists and stores that we ever had, there's only one store that split the order between all 3 of those, which was like, it was really, really interesting. But we have,
Unfortunately, that store's not around anymore.
Right.
and then, you know, we have also sold in like sex toy stores and sort of, you know, upscale sex toy stores, but you know that usually lasts about 1 issue before they're just like, that's probably not the place to buy it. But does that sort of answer your question?
Yeah.
I mean, it's definitely like our sort of art and curatorial project. So it's, you know, we have to live with that and then figure out how to get it out there. And
Right.
after like 10 years, we do have like sort of, we have a certain following that sort of collect it, which is really super nice, and they're sort of always interested to see what we're going to do next.
Yeah.
So we're always the super fans are like who we really count on. But we do think about like how we're going to sort of market.
Right, I mean,
Each
it's
one.
the world we live in. We
Yeah,
have
sure,
to
sure.
engage with the
Yeah.
world we live in.
And part
Yeah.
of my world is that world. So
Yeah. But I think it goes back to one of the things I mentioned before about the really interesting way in which the magazine even calls into question about what does it mean to be about something, right? That I feel like we're in a world now that so much kind of characterizes things, even the way it's talked about is like there is content that is sold
Yeah.
in these different packages, right? That people talk about just content trends. But I feel like you, in a way, even challenge what we think the content is of something, because the assignments, again, come at things from such a variety of issues that, again, you can't simply say, like, this is about the village people, or this is, so.
Right.
So that, I think, itself challenge, but then you could see, as you're saying, it is a challenge for bookstores to then figure out where to put it.
Right.
You've mentioned also, that some want to put it in a pornography section, and that, it's a sexy magazine. Can you talk about the place of sex and eroticism and sexuality in it, especially sort of around discussions, should we be defining queer communities in terms of sex or in terms of, things that go beyond sex, lifestyle, more even ways of thinking, like the LGBTQIA thinking that it produces, what's important and or maybe not important about sex per se in the magazine.
Yeah, I think it is important. I think it varies issue to issue. And I think that most of the artists that we work with, especially, let me think about this. Maybe not especially, but largely the photographers, if they're producing sexy images, they're not necessarily, here's a photo of a hot person. It's, here's a photo of, I'm trying to think of individual projects and of course blanking on all of them. But there are other meanings to them, even if they work immediately as aesthetically pleasing.
And I feel like it's the next jump from the sort of like physique magazines and where it's a sort of male objectification, where this is not that, and but it was very important. I mean, when we were sort of concepting the magazine, we were just like trying to describe it to people before it existed, and we're just like, well, it's a little bit arty and a little bit sexy, and I feel like that sort of Venn diagram, that sort of can actually expand or whatnot, it sort of remained, but.
And we have no say in who artists choose as models either. I think for our first issue, the very first assignment that we ever gave out was to a photographer from Seattle named Stephen Miller that we only knew from probably Tumblr, but somewhere on the internet. And we gave him his assignment, which was, we liked not being from the Pacific Northwest. We just liked how all the trees looked in his outdoor photos. And so we were like, gave him an assignment to do something outside. And he went to this cruising park and photographed 3 or 4 guys, and then sent us the photos and said, "Oh wait, you're not a bear magazine, are you?" We were like, "No, you're good."
And it was very important just early on too, is that like we're not about censoring your images or the work. Like the artist is free to, they have a lot of leverage in what they do, and we're not gonna not publish something because, it won't fit in a market or something like that.
Yeah.
Which was actually a struggle at the time too. We kind of forgot about this, but like as we were sort of getting estimates to print this thing, a lot of printers wouldn't touch it because we told them there would be sort of male nudity in it. And then, so yeah, probably went through like 4 or 5 different printers before
Wow.
we actually got a print rep who was just like, no, they'll print what I tell them to print. So
Yeah, and the first issue, I mean, it's up there, but there's the most explicit project is actually an illustration project that is about eggplants. And this illustrator who had taken the titles of, I guess it would have been Xtube at the time.
it was X2.
And any videos that had the word eggplant in the title, and then he sort of reconcepted what they might be. So they're silly. They're not pornographic, and that way they're literally drawings of eggplants.
Yeah, because in addition, I mean, to it's art, it's sexy, it's also in many ways humorous, many of the issues. I mean, they're serious, but also humorous. So the place of humor in it is also, I think, something interesting to think about.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think one that's just sort of us, and then also just sort of I mean, for me, like, humor is very important and it can be very poignant. And so, and there's humor, there's many interpretations a lot of times in humor too. So there is that sort of, you're laughing until you're just like, oh, that's pretty serious.
Yeah.
And so there'll be those sort of zingers that happen that are really interesting and sort of give a lot of depth to the work
Yeah.
that's in the issues.
And humor is also a good entry point for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Things that are too take themselves too seriously, or are too academic, or too, I mean, everything has its place, but I personally, I think we both find humor as a good entry point for people.
Yeah. You've talked also a lot, so I'll ask you sort of directly about working with artists, about working with each other. So the whole issue of collaboration, I would love to hear your thoughts on. Of course, there is the issue on collaboration.
Yeah.
I mean, but every issue you could say is a collaboration. And so, if you could talk about your thoughts about collaboration, collaborating with each other, collaborating with the artists.
Yeah. Do you want me to start?
I'll start, and then you can jump in, because I think you probably have more to say. So Jason and I are a couple in addition to being business partners. So we are collaborating at all times. The collaboration issue sort of came out of that because we were thinking, like, we work together all the time in these very specific ways that we're so familiar with that we don't really think about them, and how do other working artists work together. And so we had this idea to do an issue where we only worked with artists who were either pairs or collectives. We got 3 assignments in when the pandemic started. And then we hit all kinds of speed bumps because artists who work together maybe live in different cities where you can't travel from one to the other, and maybe there are no stores open for people to get what they need, and
Yeah. So where, as a side note, that where the issue started, what we started with and what it looks like in the end are. I mean, it's always like that, but this particularly was like, there was artists that we were very close to getting work from, and then they disappeared, and then we disappeared, and then,
and who lives in a city that has a curfew, and
Yeah.
every other thing. So on the cover of this issue is House of Rice, who are a drag collective from Vancouver, and they are sort of, I mean, they're a drag family, so they're a little bit amorphous, but there were 10 or 11 of them, I think, when we started, and at the time, I think Vancouver, like 4 people could be in a room at the same time. So they really worked around that
They
in a
did.
smart way where they photographed each other and
Worked in pods. Like, so basically there were 7 photo shoots of this sort of caliber that's on the cover. It's an all Asian drag queen, drag family. And so yeah, they were like, so there were set dressers and crazy, costume people or whatever. So the way they worked around it was pretty amazing. So, but yeah, just to then go back a little bit to the idea of collaboration. So it was just sort of like something we wanted to explore, and just like, we work together all the time. It was like we were also starting the Newport project, and so that was another major project that we're working on together. And I collaborate a lot with different artists and different designers in just sort of pretty much everything I do. So I'm just always interested in those dynamics.
Yeah.
And so in a weird way, it like really shut down also who we could work with. So the pool of artists became smaller.
Yeah.
So that again was a little bit complicated, but a lot more interesting. And because it was a pandemic, we kind of collaborated with them more. We had a lot of Zoom talks. I don't know if Zoom was pretty big at the time, and so we.
you might remember.
and so and everybody had a lot of free time, and everybody was really generous with their time. So we would just have conversations, just sort of getting to know them and like talking about the project and where it might go. So so I think we got a lot richer projects because of that. And then what I was interested in the sort of before times was just like people that collaborate or artists that collaborate do slightly different work. A lot of time it's stuff that's you just need more people to do things that are more produced. So like film and video, like if you do things on a certain scale, that could be 8 to 100 people. Like so it and a lot of collaborative or artist doers or whatever do a lot of installation work too. So I was just interested to see like what the work would be like, how it would be different from previous issues.
Yeah.
As a sort of way to like, shake it. Because each issue we're just trying to like, a lot of times like we give, we confines like this for ourselves to just sort of get us out of our ruts of just like how we might write an assignment. Like the Village people kind of came out of that because it gave us a lot of limitations, but took us out, kept it sort of fresh from like just repeating ourselves from the earlier issues as well.
Right. It is so interesting that you did the collaborative one at exactly a moment unplanned, but that really makes us question, what does it mean to be together? What does it mean to be apart? What different ways of being together might there be, even if we can't be physically together? And I think it comes together, in a way, again, with queer thinking, because I feel like queer thinking has always been trying to think about different kinds of relationalities and what it might mean to be together or apart in different ways. And certainly art also, again, making connections across lots of different ways. So I think it's fascinating. I could go on and ask you many, many, many more questions, but I want to collaborate with the audience too. So I have more if you guys don't have ideas, but can we open up to if people have questions for Jason and Matthew that you'd like to?
Yeah, I mean, it's nice that you all finished like with collaboration, because I was kind of just curious if you could speak more to like kind of the conversations that happen outside of the like just adjacent to the assignment. So I was really interested to see that as like kind of an archived material from your process, and I'm just wondering what the importance of, because I remember at one point you said that like the artists are welcome to ignore these, references. How do they know, like, how are they told to approach an assignment? Like, how do you approach them at first? Maybe this is kind of like common knowledge, sort of.
No.
Oh, sure, yeah, no. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's really person to person. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we write separate assignments for each individual artist is that you could give 10 people the same assignment and get 10 completely different things back, but those are not necessarily playing to the strengths of each of the 10 people. So we do think about, you know, from what we can tell, how people work, what the limitations might be. You know, there are some, I mean, not in a pandemic. You know, there are some artists that you know that, like, from issue 3, Peter Cochran would be a good example of an artist who is intensely, does things that are very personal and inward looking. And someone like that, we would approach in a very different way than someone who does, again, not thinking of a single example, people who do like Chris Fox, who you mentioned before, who's very much like,
He's a much different photographer. Like Peter's very like studio photography, beautiful, rich, like, you know, yeah, composed photography, and then Chris Fox is the person. I'm not sure if you were here when he did an assignment in 24 hours. He shot around the clock from like 6 in the morning to 6 in the morning. But he's a very much like, you know, he's someone who could pull a 24-hour all-nighter, go, you know, running around each borough of New York to do that. And so we would have never given that to Peter. He would have just been like, no.
and topic-wise, I mean, we look at what people are doing already. We want them to do things that are, that sort of distill what we like about their work without asking them to do exactly what they're doing already, or in most cases doing something totally different.
Yeah, and a little bit, you know, we always like to have something in there that might take someone a little bit out of their comfort zone. And I think a lot, I haven't taken a poll, but a lot of artists use the opportunity to do this project as sort of an offshoot of maybe a body of work that they're working on. So they might be like, here I am working on this body of work, you know, for what's years and years or whatever, and this is a nice diversion for them, and because they know it is a sort of like isolated nugget that will be in this magazine. So, and then funny and interesting things happen off of that. Like Derek, who was here earlier, he took his Headmaster project and ran. Like he gave us so much work for his project, and then he kept going with it and sort of built on the project. And that was like extremely satisfying, just to see that like this little nugget we threw out to him, like, you know, sort of redirect it, you know, where he took stuff. And yeah, did that?
Yeah, I was just interested to hear. I mean, it sounds like it's this kind of like internal or collaborative conversation between like these people's work, or general sense of these people's work, and like what your kind of goals are.
Yeah, and we have, you know, we have a board of conversation or assignment topics that we're, you know, oh, this would be a good topic like down the road, and like we put it in the corner or on a note card, and then we pull them out at the beginning of the issue and start to like draw lines, and we just like, you know, this topic would work for this person or maybe not, or like let's suss that out. And then we've had a lot of times like we'll have the subject matter for the topic, but then like by the time we're done with the assignment, it's like it's not quite that. It turns into something else.
And sometimes sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
That's okay.
But sometimes there's an element of timing and fortune involved. Is it number 5? 5. The cover, which is sort of a mirror.
Is it Droska's?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we actually have a slide.
Oh, we do have a slide for that. It's a photographer who was born in Serbia and fled in the 90s and went to Toronto. And right when we started talking to him, he was about to go back to Belgrade for the first time since he was young, because they were having a pride there for the first time, which ended up not happening because it got shut down. So he did this photo shoot about presence and absence with all of these openly gay men in Serbia.
That he sort of met on the fly. He didn't know any of
That
them
he
ahead
didn't know
time.
any of them before he got there. So it was totally luck. We liked his photos and said, hey, do you want to work with us? And then he said, yes. How about?
And he said, yes, but I'm going to Serbia. And we're just like, we'll have you an assignment before you get on the plane. Like,
Yeah.
so there's, really good opportunities like that. And then, just another anecdote, but like we once gave an artist a project about Neptune, the project Neptune, and so we get this email back from him the next day, and he's just like, I've been wanting to do a project about Neptune for about 10 years. And we're just like, nailed it. so yeah, I mean, it's a lot of these, things that just sort of happen like that. And that you just sort of have to be open to. So, but anyway.
Hey, I'm wondering how your conceptions of queerness have evolved over the last decade. Certainly, as teachers working with young people, as language changes, and how you reflected that in the magazine as it's evolved as well.
Yeah, it has changed quite a bit. And will surely continue to change. I don't know how directly we address it with Headmaster.
We address it definitely in the sort of language and the way we talk about it, and it's much different than we did 10 years ago. So yeah, it's just been really interesting things we would have said 10 years ago, there's no way we'd say it now, but
I mean, and the way that other people talk about us, like in interviews and when we do book fairs and stuff, we used to be a gay magazine, and now we're a queer magazine, and nobody uses the word gay anymore.
That's exactly what I was curious
Yeah.
yeah.
And we haven't really shifted our language in that time, or maybe we have, but it's very interesting that
I don't think, I think the way we write assignments and how we work with artists has always been sort of a really collaborative and queer construct. So that's remained the same, but yeah, it'll be interesting. At some point we want to do a book that would recombine a lot of the issues and all the a lot of the projects. So it'll be really, for me, it'll be like really interesting to see a project from issue number 1 with issue number 9, and just see what threads are common, what has changed, like what sort of strange categories that appear seeing the work together. So yeah, that's. I hope that answered that.
Anyone else have a question?
I'm just curious, are you working directly with students here, as part of this Brown initiative? Or do you have plans to do that at some point?
we haven't yet. We've had Brown students work with us before, unrelated to the grant. We usually have one student intern at a time, and we've had ones from most of the colleges around Rhode Island, but we've had a number from Brown. But with the Newport project that we're working on, for the last year, there were just a lot of logistical issues with being in the same space as students and all sorts of COVID protocols. It is interesting that we've been more on Headmaster for the last couple of months. So now that we're jumping back into Newport, that's something that we should think about.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something we'd be interested in, and because along with, like, especially for the Newport project, but also for Headmaster, we do a certain amount of programming as well. So there's always like opportunities.
Yeah, well, I'm not a student, I was just
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
curious
Yeah.
Yeah.
about how,
Yeah. No.
because I can't imagine how this would be, both projects actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In different ways would be really, really interesting too.
Yeah, I mean, because the,
Queer clubs
te-
on campus and.
yeah, and I think student and then people further along, that itself is a unique kind of collaboration that is interesting. And, you know, again, even as the whole idea of like assignments, I mean, there's already, in a way, you're kind of playing with that as a, so yeah.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
but again, it's so tough in the age of COVID where,
Yeah.
you know, trying to even figure out how to do things together is complicated, but yeah.
Yeah, we actually, during the pandemic, we had two different interns for Headmaster over the course of a year and a half. And I mean, if it weren't for them, I don't think this issue would be out right now. Like, honestly, it was like, it kept us in line. And one of them was supposed to be a design intern, but we were not at that point in the process of even being, we had nothing to design yet. And she ended up being an amazing researcher. So we would sort of brainstorm topics for assignments with her, and then she would go off, and then we'd Zoom 2 hours later, and, you know, she had sort of done a bunch of research for us and stuff. So it was,
Yeah,
it's
the
great.
other complication right now is that I'm spending most of my time in Canada, and Jason's going back and forth. So as far as in-person things this school year, that would be tricky.
yeah. But there's always Zoom.
There's
Yeah.
always more time for Zoom.
Any other questions? Well, I'm glad that we could be here in person instead of on Zoom. I mean, I
Yes,
really
thank
appreciate
you.
Zoom, but it's also great to be in
It
person.
really is.
And I think that while you're here in person, you also have some work up in the living rooms.
Oh, yeah,
in
we need to plug.
the building, right? So that video, do you want to say anything about the video?
Yeah. So the videos that are projected were a project for this issue of Headmaster. So it was one of those moments where, like, it's represented in the magazine, but there's also a sort of a video component that's usually online. But this was an opportunity. They happened to do 5 videos, and there's 5 living rooms with projections. So we took the opportunity to show you Chris Ozinski and Will, how do you say, Will
Howery.
Their work. They're two Pennsylvania-based artists, and they sort of they explore bromance, and one of them's a gay man and one of them's actually straight, but they collaborate in these crazy videos together, all about their sort of bromance. So
What was their assignment?
their assignment was actually about synesthesia.
Oh, right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah. So yeah,
And so, yeah, they were looking at the names of the completely nonsensical flavor names of sports, like Gatorade and Monster beverages.
So yeah, so each of the videos is like them pouring these crazy colored things on each other, and the names of the videos are the actual names of these, like Gatorade, Bizarro.
And so, yeah, if you take the stairs down on your way out,
Yeah, you
you'll
can see them
all.
in the different areas. So thank you so much for sharing your work with us. Thank you all for coming, and thanks to the BAI.
Yes.
So yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.